Okay, let's do an overview of the cardiovascular system. We're going to start with blood flow, how it flows through the heart. So blood comes back to the heart via the superior and inferior vena cavas and enters into the right atrium. Here. The atriums contract and blood will flow through the right AV valve, also known as the tricuspid, into the right ventricle here, this chamber out here. Blood then goes out of the ventricle through the pulmonary valve, up through the pulmonary trunk, and then that will disperse out the left and right pulmonary arteries, will go out to the lungs and pick up oxygen. It will come back to the heart via the pulmonary veins. Here's our right, and here's our left, and return and enter into the left atrium here. It will then go through the bicuspid or the left AV, also known as the mitral valve, into the left ventricle. The ventricle will contract and send blood out the aortic valve, which is way back up there. Out of the aortic valve into the aorta with our ascending aorta, the arch or the aortic arch, and then the descending aorta. And then it will continue out throughout the body, go to the tissues that is needed, and come back to the lungs again, starting the cycle over with the vena cava. So remember, this is a closed circuit. Wherever you start with blood flow, you can end up back where you started. Another thing to keep in mind here is the difference between arteries and veins. The purpose of arteries is to take blood away from the heart. Veins bring it back. Now, the majority of the time, arteries are going to be carrying oxygenated or oxygen-rich blood, and veins will be carrying deoxygenated or oxygen-poor blood. On the models and in pictures, you often see this designated as oxygen-rich and oxygenated red, and deoxygenated or oxygenated poor blood blue. But in the heart, this is slightly different. The coloring doesn't quite match. So you really have to think about the function of each vessel. So the pulmonary circuit here with the pulmonary trunk and the arteries, these are blue. And the purpose of the arteries, again, is to take blood away from the heart. So they're leaving the heart and going out to the lungs. They're blue because they're deoxygenated. This is oxygen poor blood. It's come back from the body, and now it's going to go to the heart to pick up oxygen and drop off carbon dioxide. So out to the lungs, back to the heart via the pulmonary veins, which are indicated as red and being oxygen rich or oxygenated. But again, they're bringing blood back to the heart. So that designates their function. Also kind of wrapped in with this, we do want to think about the cardiac conduction system. It starts with the SA node, which is located up here in the atrium. That sends out a signal to the AV node, which is kind of located in this nice spot at the lower right atrium near the ventricles. The AV node then sends out a message through the AV bundle, and then the AV branches going down the septum here. And then they'll go into the right and left ventricles with the Purkinje fibers. So the signal for the ventricles will leave from the AV node more kind of in this region here, and then disperse that signal out, but the Purkinje fibers are what's going to stimulate the cells down in the ventricles. The SA node will stimulate the cells of the atrium to contract. And as we're thinking about this too, when we're saying stimulation and contraction, you can pull in those terms depolarizing and repolarizing. So when the atriums contract, and both right and left are going to contract together, they've depolarized, and that's caused that contraction. That contraction is then what pumps blood into the ventricles. As the atrium are repolarizing, we have our ventricles depolarizing and contracting, squeezing, and that's going to pump blood out and away from the heart. If you think of your EKG, where you have your P wave, the first little wave, and that signals electrically what's happening, that electrical impulse that's going through the atriums, that's stimulating, that depolarizing, that movement of ions and currents, that depolarizing results in the contraction. So with the P wave, it's picking up on that electrical depolarization, that current, which stimulates contraction. Your QRS complex, we have a bunch of things happening there. Our atriums are repolarizing, while our ventricles are depolarizing. So our atriums are repolarizing to relax, and then the ventricles are starting their depolarization in order to contract. And that's what is electrically showing up on the EKG, is those movements of electricity. So we have our contraction here and relaxation of the atriums for our QRS complex. With the T wave, nothing's happening with the atrium. It's on its break, it's on its rest. But the ventricles here are undergoing repolarization to get back to their resting state. So that repolarizing event is picked up by the EKG in that T wave. So it's all coming together with our contraction, our depolarizing, our repolarizing, and how we can see that on an EKG and how blood flows through the heart.